Hello and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Brett Schwartz, an Associate Director at the NATO Research Foundation. We're so glad you could join us today for our session that will take a closer look at strengthening opportunities to build connections between states and economic development districts. Today's session will highlight how state economic development offices and regionally based economic development districts, or EDDs, can better align their efforts, in particular by coordinating statewide economic development plans and regional comprehensive economic development strategies known as the CEDS. During this webinar, you'll learn more about the CEDS process and how it can support efforts to meet regional and statewide economic development goals. And you'll also hear how the Eastern Maine Development Corporation, located in Bangor and serving 4 counties, has forged a strong partnership with the Maine Department of Economic and Community Development, a great example of an EDD state government collaboration that is leading to powerful outcomes for local residents and businesses. So we've got a great panel of speakers assembled today for us, and I'm looking forward to introducing them in just a moment, but want to share a few opening remarks. So today's webinar is co-sponsored by the Center for Regional Economic Competitiveness, CREC, and the NATO Research Foundation, brought to you through a project funded by the U.S. Economic Development Administration called Enhancing State and Local Engagement to Support COVID-19 Recovery and Resilience. For those of you unfamiliar with their organizations, you'll get to hear from my colleagues at CREC and EDA in just a moment. The NATO Research Foundation, where I'm at, is the nonprofit research arm of the National Association of Development Organizations, which represents regional planning commissions, councils of governments, economic development districts all across the country, particularly those serving small metro and rural regions. So we're really honored to be a part of this, what we think is a very important project, and continuing our ongoing partnerships with CREC and EDA. So this probably goes without saying, but we are at a pivotal time in the fields of economic and community development. With unprecedented levels of funding and resources available, we really have an opportunity to meet the moment by addressing the pressing challenges of our time related to climate and resilience, equity and inclusion, new technologies and innovation, and much more. However, I offer that to meet the moment, we really need to take a deeper and more critical look at our institutions, our partnerships, and our overall way of doing economic development. And today's session will take a look at how strengthening relationships across federal, state, and regional levels can help us address many of our challenges by leveraging our expertise and our enthusiasm, and hopefully by breaking down institutional and bureaucratic barriers at all levels of government that may have been impeding progress. So I'm really looking forward to getting to our discussion. Just want to share some quick logistics for all of you that have joined us today. We've got a great crowd online from across the country. Any questions that you have for the panelists, feel free to use that in the questions box, which is in a little drop-down menu on the right side of your screen. We'll try to get to as many of those questions as we can at the end of the session. A recording of today's webinar, as well as the slides, will be made available shortly at our website, nato.org, as well as sent to you via email tomorrow to all registrants to take a look and review and share with your colleagues. And then at the end, as we close out, at the end of our hour together, there'll be a quick post-webinar survey. Please take a moment or two to give us some feedback, really help us continue to kind of craft sessions and other resources that really meet your needs. And of course, if you have any questions about this project or this webinar, feel free to reach out to myself or Bob Isaacson at CREC, who will be meeting in just a moment, and be happy to work with you and learn more about what your needs are. So with that, I'm really honored to be sharing the stage today with a real A-list panel of speakers who will help us take a deeper dive into these issues that we're talking about. So in the order that they'll be speaking today, you'll first hear from Bob Isaacson, who is the Senior Vice President at CREC. Bob will kind of talk a little bit more about the project goals that we have kind of moving forward, as well as kind of frame our discussion and the needs that are out there. Following Bob, we'll hear from Dave Ives, who is the Deputy Director at the Performance Research and National Technical Assistance Division at the U.S. Economic Development Administration. Dave will give an overview of EDA's mission, the CEDS process, and really some of those opportunities to help better forge those federal, state, and regional partnerships. And then we'll get to hear kind of a really great case study and example from our 2 partners in Maine. First, we'll hear from Lee Umphrey, who's the Executive Director at Eastern Maine Development Corporation. Lee will talk about their most recent CEDS process, which just completed a couple months ago, and really about ways that they were able to really align their CEDS plan with the state economic development plan and what that experience has been like. And then finally, we'll hear from Commissioner Heather Johnson with the Maine Department of Economic and Community Development. Commissioner Johnson will continue to also share ideas about what this relationship with the regions looks like, what value there is, and hopefully some kind of best practices for those of you around the country to better coordinate between your state governments and your local economic development districts. So again, we've tried to protect some time at the end for some Q&A. We've got a lot to get through, but I'm really looking forward to our discussion. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Bob to kick things off. So Bob, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Brett. I'm going to provide some background on why we're so interested in alignment of states and economic development districts, but let me give you a little bit of background on CREC. We're an independent nonprofit based in Arlington, Virginia, that provides strategic analysis and manages a variety of networks of data and research professionals. And we really are working to provide technical assistance to help produce innovative and really unique regional job creating strategies. Next slide. Because of this work, working with a variety of different state and local governments and nonprofit organizations, we really maintain a unique position in the marketplace. We have a comprehensive understanding of state dynamics through the State Economic Development Executive Network, which is a forum for state economic development and commerce agency CEOs, executive directors, commissioners, and their deputies. And it's designed to exchange information and learn from one another and advance the practice and hopefully have some impact of economic development across the nation. So that's on one hand, we have a great understanding of state dynamics, but we also have done a lot of work with local economic developers, including economic development districts throughout the country. Next slide. So all this work with the states and a variety of local economic development districts has really given us some great basis and some findings from this work, and including some recent research. Generally, we recognize there's a misalignment of state and local economic development strategies and investments. It's not uncommon at all. Plans and activity investments are often not coordinated, and often they don't build upon each other's plans, and unfortunately, in worst case scenario, they may operate at cross purposes. Even a recent survey that we did with states asking how they worked with the economic development districts with the state planning grants indicated that it is very rare for states to be working with the economic development districts either in applying for those $1 million grants and or executing the actual activities funded by those grants. Really, we're looking to seek improved alignment that can boost economic recovery and long-term growth, which really speaks to the overall essence of the title of the work here, enhancing state and local economic development districts' engagements to support COVID recovery and resilience. You know, in conversations with EDA, they also want to see the alignment, and they see the alignment challenge, and they want to improve the alignment between states and local economic development districts. So we look at what can we do? Next slide. EDA said, let's look at a project that we can fund with CREC to promote alignment across state and regional economic development organizations. The next question was, why would you do this? Well, I've addressed some of those questions. A lot of the investments aren't aligned properly and they're not very well coordinated, and oftentimes states operate independently of EDA supported initiatives, including those identified in regional CEDS. So the question is, how will we do this? How will we improve alignment? Well, we're going to look at launching this project with EDA through three real key parts: some applied research, some education and technical assistance, and we're really hoping that we're going to enable state and local leadership to create jobs and achieve economic recovery better through improved coordination of investments, alignment of efforts to grow key industry clusters, and then leveraging the common tools that the state and local economic development districts have. But CREC is not going to be able to do this by ourselves, and that's one reason why we really see NATO as a key partner in helping us do this work. Also, the SEED network, the American Manufacturing Communities Collaborative, and CIDO, the State International Trade Network, that's going to help us out as well. So they're going to be looking to help us out in organizing applied research, developing and deploying the educational materials, and the third element is providing technical assistance to states and regions. I want to do just a little bit of a dive here in terms of some of the three tasks. The first area is research. It kind of provides the foundation for the educational and technical assistance. Three key parts about this. The first one is the matrix, really trying to develop a matrix of states and the local economic development districts, economic development plans, and their strategies to try to find out what kind of overlapping consistencies there are, or where there's some gaps between the two plans in each state. We're also going to be looking at best practices guide, which is one reason I'm so excited to hear from Maine today to talk about or to listen to them about some of the best practices they've been doing. We've heard some other areas as well about some wonderful activities they're doing, including some great new initiatives in California. And I'm going to be revisiting this in just a moment to inquire about some other ideas folks have. And then we're going to be developing some guidelines for integrating international engagement into local CEDS as well. Task 2 is education. 5 big areas here, beginning with developing educational content to help people inform people about priority issues, whether it be workforce talent or supply chain issues. We want to develop a peer-led online curriculum to guide new state economic development leaders to help them understand the overall economic development infrastructure at the local level and the regional level. We want to develop educational content to help improve the understanding and the importance of collaboration. We're going to be developing webinars on key topics. This is one that we're working with Nato on to really leverage state resource to support EDA activities. And finally, engage state leaders in a state EDA working group to really improve that collaboration and communication and ensure that we're all working together in the same direction. And once we develop the research and once we've done some of the education, now it's time to kind of execute, really provide that technical assistance. So we're going to be providing TA through conferences or peer exchange. We're also going to be doing a policy academy with 6 states to really understand some best practices on how to build from that to create a network for all states across the country. Be conducting outreach and technical assistance to incorporate international engagement into the CEDS to really try to improve that linkage between states and the local economic development districts. And then also really trying to improve the overall communication with the state leaders to align with economic development goals at the regional level. We see the project deliverables and the best practices that we'll be learning about throughout the nation will provide a foundation to improve the alignment and better economic performance as we look to recover from COVID and really look for a strong, resilient economy moving forward to sustain ourselves in the long run. I mentioned California and Maine as 2 great best practices that are emerging. I'm looking for other examples. So Brett mentioned my email earlier on. I have it on this slide as well. If you have some ideas about some great long-term state plans or state economic development and local economic development district coordination, collaboration, whether it be a single instance or a long-term relationship, love to hear more about that because we want to learn from that and hopefully communicate that to other areas so that we can build the awareness of what you're doing and the terrific examples that you're providing, as well as letting others learn from that. With that framing, I want to toss it over to EDA in Maine and learn a little bit more what's going on at that level. Thanks.
Great, Bob. Well, thanks so much for those remarks. And again, really encourage everyone to reach out. We've got a lot of exciting work ahead of us on this project and appreciate everyone's participation. So Bob, thanks so much. So with that, we're going to turn things over to Dave Ives at EDA to kind of give EDA's perspective on these issues and really talk about some of these opportunities to further collaboration. So Dave, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you very much, Brett. Great to be here with you and everyone this afternoon. I actually am going to, now that I've said hello, I'm going to go off camera so that we can focus on the slides. Okay, thank you. I know many of the folks on the call are actually familiar with EDA and what we do, but I know there are a number of folks who are not. So I really wanted to take a few minutes at the very beginning and just talk a little bit about EDA and provide a short overview. So EDA, the Economic Development Administration, is the economic development arm of the U.S. Department of Commerce. And in that role, we provide grants to units of state and local government and nonprofits. And that also includes tribal organizations and institutions of higher education. And it's really focused on helping communities and regions that are suffering from economic distress. And the real intent of the grants that we make is to help these communities and regions build the capacity for economic development. And when I'm talking about economic development here, I'm really talking about helping these communities and regions expand their economic base. And that really happens through economic development, which in the simplest of terms is bringing new dollars into that community or region. And the public sector role, at least from EDA's perspective, but the public sector role is helping those communities and regions build the capacity for economic development. And that really means helping that community or region better position, improve, or develop assets that really help the private sector then succeed, in doing those things that you often hear about with economic development, the creation of jobs and the generation of private capital investment. So when we're talking about capacity building, that's really what we're talking about, is helping those communities and regions. And that will mean different things for different communities. In some places, a community or region will need, basic infrastructure. So they'll be looking for roads or water and sewer. Other places may need things like broadband, and then yet others may need things like help developing or forming partnerships and networking, things along those lines. So it really, the real message there is this capacity building is something that pretty much every community needs, but it's going to differ community to community. And EDA's support for that capacity building is through its suite of grant programs. And the traditional core programs range from upfront strategic planning, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get into a discussion around the CEDS, through pre-development activities, which includes technical assistance, things like impact analyses, feasibility studies, and then including implementation, which is really about those types of grants that support brick and mortar type projects, water, sewer lines, roads, broadband, some of those hard infrastructure type projects. And in addition to our core funding, EDA has received supplemental dollars over the last 2 years that are really focused on helping regions recover from the pandemic. And that $4.5 billion, 1.5 billion of it we received in 2020. The CARES Act, most of that funding has been obligated, but there's another $3 billion that we've just received this past year that we are in the process of unveiling. That's our ARPA funding, the American Recovery Plan Act funding. And some of that money is already on the street. More of it, much more of it is on the way. And I highly recommend anyone that's interested in those programs in particular, any of our programs, but in those dollars in particular, to check out our website. I have the address there at the bottom of the slide. And I should also point out too, if you have interest in EDA or any of its programs, including our ARPA funding, another great place to start out is with EDD-state points of contact within our different regional offices. It never hurts to start with those folks. They're extremely knowledgeable, and they're the ones that really can help have the rubber meet the road, so to speak, when it comes to EDA's grants. Next slide, please. I mentioned EDA's program areas, and one of the primary ones, obviously, is planning. And it really starts with what I mentioned in that first bullet you see there, which is, EDA strongly believes that good economic development starts with good economic development planning. It's foundational to what we do. And it manifests itself through EDA's planning program, which is really focused on assisting local and regional organizations with both their short and long-term economic development planning. And, the emphasis on planning, really reflects a couple things. One, that we really strongly believe in the inherent benefit of planning and what it can bring to economic development. And that kind of manifests itself in the fact that in order to access some of EDA funding, the implementation projects that I mentioned earlier, a lot of that brick and mortar hard construction, in order to access that funding, those projects need to align with an asset-based strategic plan, really the CEDS. And the goal there is to prevent one-off projects. We want to make sure that the funding that we are helping communities with is really tied to a plan, so that those projects have kind of been properly vetted and are part of a greater vision for how that region plans to focus on economic development and ensure resiliency and prosperity moving forward. And I should point out as well that other agencies across the federal government are getting on board with this concept of making sure that projects are tied to plans. One great example is USDA, U.S. Department of Agriculture. Their rural development side of the house has set aside a certain percentage of funding there for projects that are tied back to strategic plans, including the strategic plans that that many of our districts and other regional organizations put together. So this concept of planning, I think, is something that continues to gain momentum for a number of different reasons. From our perspective, a lot of the work around planning and the implementation of the planning happens through our economic development districts. You've already heard that term mentioned, the EDDs. These are EDA designated and funded regional organizations formed really to undertake regional economic development planning. And they're the ones that are responsible for implementing and updating the CEDS, the Comprehensive Economic Development Strategies. EDDs are one of EDA's most important and valued stakeholders. They're the ones that with the boots on the ground, they know what's going on from a regional perspective, and we really depend on them not only as a key component in the development of the CEDS, but also as they play a very important role in terms of information sharing and collaboration and convening the different stakeholders and players in economic development in their particular region. So can't say enough about these economic development districts. You can see from the map on the right, there are 393 of them across the country, covering about 83% of the US, really key players in economic development from a regional perspective. Next slide. The CEDS itself is really a couple things. Most people think of the CEDS, they think of the plan, and it is. It's a strategy-driven plan. We often refer to it as a blueprint or a roadmap for regional economic development. But beyond the plan itself, which is critical, it's also a process, and it's a very collaborative process that brings together a broad array of different perspectives from the public, private, nonprofit, educational sectors. It brings them together, as I mentioned earlier, to kind of form that understanding and positioning and leveraging of regional assets to enhance economic competitiveness. And as I mentioned before, when you think about economic development from a public perspective, you think about the capacity building associated. And the CEDS is really the first step in that, because if the goal of economic development is to build these capacities, then really the planning in the CEDS becomes how you go about or how you plan to build that capacity. So it's really an important part in determining what's critical for economic success in each region. The CEDS has a number of key and common content areas. A summary background, which talks about a lot of the key elements of that particular background, where that region came from, what its strengths are. It does a SWOT analysis, which looks at the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats around that particular area. And that's where a lot of the asset information, a lot of the challenges come out. They develop an action plan, which is keyly focused on key goals and objectives. And then it includes a mechanism to evaluate the effectiveness of the plan and how they've done moving forward. And it also must include economic resilience. That's a really critical part. And we define that as the ability of a community or region to withstand or quickly recover from, bounce back from a major disruption to the underlying economic base. And that concept of economic resilience is really key, because the CEDS and an inclusion of resilience is reflective of the idea that communities and regions not only to be aware of and be resilient to natural disasters, but any other type of economic disruption. So it could be a downturn in the economy or the loss of a major employer. It's really a kind of a broad-based view on resilience, and you see that in the CEDS. But for the five content areas that are required, the CEDS themselves are very much individualized. They're very much focused on those particular areas and topics that make sense for that particular community or region. So one CEDS, you may see a strong focus on disaster resiliency, and another CEDS, it may be housing or the environment or energy. Transportation. It really depends on what is key to that particular region. And it's not only about the content that's individualized, but also the look and feel of these documents is going to vary depending on how that particular community thinks it's going to best able to access and engage stakeholders and talk through these issues with decision makers. So you'll see some CEDS that are kind of the traditional documents, 8.5 by 11. Others are fully online. So it really depends on what works best. And I think the fact that there are some key content areas that are consistent but the individualization of each CEDS, I think, is one of the strengths of the program overall. Next slide. And finally, just a couple key takeaways before we turn this over to the speakers, other speakers. I think it's important when we're thinking about this idea of state and the states and the districts integrating, coordinating more. I think it's based primarily on this concept that economic development, at least from EDA's perspective, is inherently regional. And that's why you see that's the focus of the EDDs and the CEDS. From our perspective, communities are very much interdependent. They share similar opportunities and challenges. They really have assets that cross jurisdictional boundaries often, and really that is one of the main drivers of the regional approach to economic development, at least again from EDA's perspective. We also are strong believers in the idea that communities accomplish more when they work together. We've seen that time and time again, and you're going to hear about that even more with the coming speakers. So in addition to this concept of regionalism and the importance of regionalism from an economic development perspective, the other thing that's really key is plan alignment. And when we're talking about plan alignment, we're talking about not just across platforms, which could be ways to align economic development planning with hazard mitigation planning, or economic development planning with a housing consolidated plan. But also between state and regional plans. I think there's a lot of value in that kind of approach. And I think we talk about it from a CEDS perspective in terms of cross-pollinating and cross-pollinating plans and bringing the best from both. And I think the CEDS and the districts in particular are well positioned to do that and to undertake this because of the regional nature that they have. And they're responsible in many respects for a lot of the engagement and development of other regional plans too. So I think they're well positioned for that. And they also, are positioned to find alignments between the goals and strategies of different plans. As I mentioned earlier, they're really good at convening the stakeholders that are needed to effectively collaborate around economic development. And they have the capacity and the logistical assistance to coordinate those efforts. So, by combining efforts, by combining plans, by looking for alignments, I think you get a bigger bang for the buck. And we know that resources are limited out there, so that's always a big one. You bring new stakeholders to the table, which I always think is important, particularly from an economic development perspective. There's an opportunity when you integrate and to align plans for greater public input and involvement of different sectors and different businesses. That's always big. And more than anything, I think when you align plans either across sectors or state to regional, I think what you're doing is you're heightening the overall impact of that plan. And granted, you obviously, when you do that, you can prevent the duplication of efforts, or as Bob mentioned, doing things at cross purposes. But in addition to that, I think you really do increase impact because, by aligning, by integrating, you're kind of working down the same road, and you're all focused on the same set of outcomes. Because that's, I think, one of the big issues when you have so many plans is that everybody's focused on different outcomes. Everyone's got their own agenda. But when you do a little bit of alignment and if possible, integration, you're going to get everybody moving on the same road, in the same direction, focused on the same outcomes. And I think in the end, that really increases overall impact. So I think I'll stop there. One more mention. Again, more information on EDA can be found at our website, eda.gov, and more information in particular on the planning program and the CEDS can be found at eda.gov/CEDS. And with that, I think I will turn it back to Brett. Thanks, Brett.
Great, Dave. Thank you, as always, so much for that great perspective. I know it's a busy time over at EDA, an exciting time, so really encourage folks on the call today to reach out to their regional offices or their state economic development representatives to learn more about the resources that are out there. I'd also be remiss if I didn't put a little plug in for our website, CEDS Central. For those of you who are new to the CEDS process or need a refresher, this is a website that we have built with support of EDA over the past 5 years. that has a wide variety of resources, webinars, case studies, best practices, all related to the CEDS planning and implementation process. And we have 2 new resources that are posted there. You see on the right, we have a economic development writing and lecture series, which are short issue briefs, as well as video tutorials on a variety of economic development topics that would likely be of interest to folks on the call today, as well as our Taking the CEDS to the Next Level page, which are kind of really good examples and best practices and a variety of topics and aspects of the CEDS related to equity and inclusion, resilience, design and outreach, and much more. So I wanted to get this quick plug in for CEDS Central after the webinar to check out to learn more. So with that, I'm really excited to, we're all gonna get in a plane and fly up to Maine together, get a case study, an example of a really powerful collaboration happening at the regional and state levels. So first we'll hear from Lee Humphrey, who is the president and CEO of Eastern Maine Development Corporation, to talk about their CEDS process and their collaboration with the state. So Lee, thanks again so much for being here, and looking forward to your remarks.
EDs.
Actually, Lee, sorry to interrupt. I was muted and you were muted at the same time, so just take it from the top and we'll be good.
Hey, am I unmuted now?
You're perfect. We hear you loud and clear. Thanks, Lee.
Oh, good. Well, I'm sorry, Brett. I'm not going to repeat all the compliments for you, but
no, feel free anytime.
no, actually, I will. What I was saying to myself, evidently, was EDA has played a profound role in Maine, and we really appreciate that. I think some of the investments that have happened have really made a big difference. So, David and Bob, appreciate your comments previously, and Brett for NATO, you know, helping us sort through things and being there, not just you know, with information, but it's a great resource, and I think it's a great community. So we just appreciate EDA and NATO and all that. If you look at this cover of our CEDS report, we kind of brought it up a notch. Our pal, the editorial cartoonist for the local newspaper, George Dandy, drew this cartoon. And I have to tell you, it's a challenge to work with a political cartoonist to come up with a piece of art. He wanted to do the Titanic. He wanted to do a ship going down a toilet, you know, all of those things. But he came up with this beautiful piece of art. And for us, Maine shipbuilding is our heritage, and our steadiness throughout good times and bad, rough seas and calm seas has really been important. And it makes me think of what FDR said during the middle of the Depression. He said, "A smooth sea never made a skilled sailor." So that's the approach we've taken. On the second slide, you can see how big our rural area is. And we've faced adversity before. 20 years ago, 5 paper mills closed. And you think of the impact that it had, not just with jobs, but in communities and just in you know, people's day-to-day lives. We're a big geographic area, and you can see how sparse the population is. There's no public transportation. There's a lot of issues, you know, connectivity, not just with broadband, but to universities and hospitals. So it's a pretty challenging area, and it's different. If you look at the coast, you know, we've got fishermen, and there's now aquaculture growing, and you go up the Penobscot River, that blue line, it's a blue artery that connects the ocean to the Mount Katahdin area, really brings us together. So we've got a long history and a proud history, but we've also faced many challenges. And the way we've tackled that, you'll see with the integration of services in the next slide, is that as an organization, we try to blend all the things we do together. Workforce is so important. We actually are the WIOA provider, the workforce development provider, funded through Department of Labor for 9 of the 16 counties in Maine. So we work closely with businesses and education partners to make sure people are getting the skills they need to fill the jobs that are out there. And our efforts in the community, working just with counties and county governments and different municipalities, and helping them kind of make some strategic plans and how to leverage their resources. And with business, this has been a trying time throughout the pandemic, and EDA revolving loan fund was a big part of our ability to help people. But small business loans and working with the governor's office and with the CARES Act and other things really, I think, is a key component. And all of this kind of informed our approach to the CEDS. So the way we started, this is the big three right here. You'll hear from Heather in a few minutes, but this is our big three. We had 3 big meetings and having stakeholders of about 75 folks involved. We tried to make sure it was not only from around the region, but different sectors and different voices. And one of the beauty of Zoom is you can mute people. So some of the people who take all the air out of the room, all the experts, you guys know these people in your communities. We were able to mute them and have some new voices. And I think that was important. But we started with Heather Johnson. And before the pandemic, the new administration, Governor Mills, started a process of reforming state government and kind of re-engaging it to be more connected to the services and the people in the state. And Heather Johnson and her team started a process to create a 10-year economic strategy. And so that was the focal point and the framework to get this started. So Heather was our first speaker in our first meeting, and that helped inform the conversation. Next, we had our pal Hannah Pingree, who was a former state legislator, Speaker of the House, and the governor created this new position for her of policy innovation in the future, and with climate resiliency and action in the forefront. And that was an important part of what we wanted to talk about, and you'll see at the end of this presentation that it's one of our priorities. Like most places and most rural places, there's a hesitancy to acknowledge climate change. And so that was a big challenge for us. And Heather, through her work, really helped us kind of get through that. And lastly, Senator Angus King was our top choice to be the third keynote speaker because he was governor for 8 years and he really knows the state and he knows how to make connections between what the issue is and how do you find a solution. He's doing that in the Senate now. He's the champion of broadband. You'll see if you look at the interview, the tape we did of his talk to our group, he wants to make Maine the work-at-home state. But he's been 8 years as governor, 8 years as senator. He was the best person for us to kind of, create a framework for discussion. And I think it was important with these meetings to not just have it a free-for-all and have broad topics, but have these expert testimonies from these three that kind of shaped the conversation and kept the flow going. And plus, when you get big shots to attend a meeting, they like that. So you'll see, if you look at that word cloud, we're really pleased. Anna Stockman, who led this process for EMDC, we were amused, if you look closely, about what do you like about this region. There's a line in there called black flies. So I was tempted to take that out, but it didn't make any sense. But at the same time, black flies are a big part of Maine in the spring, so we kept it in there. But it kind of gives you a sense with community recreation and opportunities, everything we're doing. So our CEDS process really engaged people at every level. We had locally elected officials, we had the congressional delegation staff people attended, we had state legislators, we had university people. It was a really good cross-section, and I think indicates why we're able to work so well with the state, because we had everybody here. A lot of those same folks were involved in the state process when they did their report. The second piece was creating a task force of a group of 10 people, a smaller group to kind of dig into these issues to sort them through. And then Anna Stockman, our colleague, did about a dozen personal interviews with experts in the field. And I think that was important. One of the immediate outcomes of this process is we did a business survey to really gauge what businesses who weren't at these meetings, but what are their needs and where do we go from here? And the reason we did that is we're really creating a crosswalk between this report and our actions later. And that's why we did that. So these two reports, and there'll be links in the chat, and they'll be posted on NATO. But these are the reports. The state's focus on innovation and talent was really a key foundation for us, as was the Climate Council's report. Another report, and I was a member of the Governor's Economic Recovery Committee, was also part of this discussion. And I think going back to what David talked about this alignment, it's a great starting point because it makes sense, but also the continuity is really important. And so I really appreciate that. And then the next slide. So one of the other things we tried to do is, before we started this process, I called this, with my colleagues, a seminal moment for EMDC. In that, I thought going through a process, engaging people and coming up with a report, I mean, that happens a lot, but we need to do something more. And it was a way to redefine who we were as an organization and how we engage people. And I think the pandemic kind of made people think a little differently. So there was an opportunity for us to be more engaging and do different things. And to do that, we approached Patty Griffin, who grew up in Old Town, Maine, which is a mill town just 10 miles from where I'm sitting. And initially asked her to sing the song of the CEDS, but she rightly said the Zoom doesn't accommodate good singing. So she let us use this song, which talks about her growing up in Old Town. And, now she's a big shot singer-songwriter in Nashville, but, her town, hometown, Old Town is still in her heart. So that's why that's there. And the second piece, we had, because of the pandemic, the local art society didn't have a place to have their art show. So we let them have it here. And we noticed this painting on the wall that depicted the climate, the temperature changes in Maine. And so we made that the painting of the CEDS. And the artist was thrilled, and she ended up winning. We chose her to be in our report, and then she won the best in show. So that's a great thing. Okay. And this is another drawing by Danby. This was our annual report from a year ago. Pre-pandemic, we could put masks on the folks and use it again this year, but we won't. But kind of gives you a sense of who we think we are. We're the people who are going to come and help people who need it the most. And some of the new challenges we face in Maine and everywhere is equity. And there's new Mainers coming in. And here in rural Maine, in the 2nd district of Maine, it's very conservative and very myopic and very resistant. So getting them to talk about equity and diversity is a challenge, but we did it. Same thing with climate. I don't think people wanted to talk about it too much, but when you think of the Gulf of Maine is the fastest warming water in the world, and we've got a lobster industry and a fishing industry, that's an issue. There's flooding happening, there's all kinds of things. So we got folks to talk about something that they resisted for political reasons. And so we kind of took the politics away from it and made it a real community conversation. Next slide. This is a picture of Bucksport, which is down the river. That's the Penobscot River. And we've really helped, they closed and it's becoming a vibrant place. The whole town's becoming vibrant. And we spend a lot of time there trying to help transform mill towns. But it's not just the towns itself, it's the surrounding areas. So, of course, with the pandemic and with everything else, there could be 100 different topics that we could focus on. So what we tried to do is really distill it into some basic things. And broadband is the top priority. And Senator King and others have talked about this as really being key and making it a priority. So that's why that's number one. And you'll hear from Commissioner Johnson, and her background immediately before becoming commissioner was to head the broadband efforts in Maine. So she's a real expert in that field. Transportation's an issue. Not only do we not have public transportation, but there needs to be better freight. There needs to be better ports. There needs to be better transportation overall. So we're thrilled with the infrastructure bill. And climate resiliency, again, it was a challenge to get people to talk about it and to accept it. But I think we did that. And, you know, business development, I think it's going to go back to broadband. When I started a few years ago, new businesses would ask about the local schools. And now the first question is broadband access. And workforce and education is an issue. I think there's a transition in the workforce now. People think they can work from home, and sometimes they can and sometimes they can't. And so there's a big transition, and we're always looking at skills and interests and capacity and trying to help workers be trained for the jobs that are out there. Okay. So, you know, for us, you know, and I like all the talk about planning and stuff. We have a saying in Maine that if you sail without, no, I can't remember it. Sail without thinking and you end up sinking. That's something we say here. And so I think it's really important. And, you know, reports like this, process-wise, it's good. It brings people together. But you have to do something with it. So we're really trying to turn these ideas into actions. And I think it's key. And it's just really important. And the way we work with the state, not only with this, but every day, is key also. I think there has to be an affinity on both sides, a reciprocal relationship. And what we do with Commissioner Johnson and DECD, we do with Department of Labor and the governor's office, Governor Mills. I think you have to speak up a lot. And if you look at Maine, we're a big state, and a lot of the resources go south of the capital. So we're in the rural area, so we have to speak up even more. But we have a very receptive audience, and I think that's key. Same thing with how the state deals with Washington. I think it's important that the people at the White House care about the states. And so it all kind of goes together. So what we try to do in this process and everything we do is provide good information to the state and expect the same from them. And I think it really works. You know, here in Maine, we're small enough, we get to know our congressional delegation, our commissioners and other folks, but we work well together because it's important. It's not just a common mission. It's kind of like the thrill of getting something done. And the pandemic has taught everybody a lot of things besides getting vaccinated, wearing a mask. But how do we deal with each other? How do we, with kindness, do the right thing? And I think that's what's happening. And I think our success as an organization, as a community-based organization, is based on trust, which is based on having good information and trying to get outcomes that help everybody. So that's the story from Maine. Anybody listening, if you want to come up here, there's plenty of jobs. We're going to have broadband statewide, and it's a beautiful place. And sail without thinking, you end up sinking. So there it is.
Well said, Lee. Well, thank you so much for those remarks, and really congratulations to you and your team on the incredible CEDS. As you mentioned, not just the document itself, but the entire process. It's certainly an example that we've been promoting to our membership and around the country. So we're looking forward to following you as you move towards implementation. So thanks again. So with that, we're going to have our final speaker will be Commissioner Johnson from the Maine Department of Economic and Community Development. Commissioner Johnson, thanks so much for being here with us. I'm looking forward to hearing your remarks and just maybe just reflecting on some of the things that you've heard throughout the session today. So take it away.
Great, yeah, thank you. You know, certainly it's great to listen to Lee talk through the work that they're doing in Bangor, obviously, because it always gives another perspective to how we do this together. When we, one of the first things we did in the first week, and Lee was a great help with this, is got the economic development groups together with our new team as we were coming in to say, how do we work together? How do we change the dynamic in the landscape locally? Good economic development work is done as locally as it can be done, certainly supported with resources and other areas of support at the state level, in our opinion, but good economic development is really done kind of in the regional and local levels. So we wanted to make sure that we had created a fabric that we could all have shared goals and shared opportunities. And I would say, you know, what we've seen in the pandemic is that it has exacerbated certain challenges that Maine had, but our systemic economic challenges are pretty consistent. So we've got a lot of work to do there. We created a state economic plan. We can see very clearly CEDS goals tying into those statewide plans. And that gives us an opportunity to really look at project level work to move metrics forward and to really make a difference. So, you know, Lee talked about this as well. We've got really solid plans now, I think, in Maine. We've got a good roadmap at the state level. We've got CEDS to more closely tie the work there. And now, right, it's really about it's about execution and doing this well and really kind of moving forward. So one of the things CEDS and the state strategic plan has done for Maine is really given us also a framework as we think about investments, as we think about economic recovery from a pandemic. Again, there are pieces of the pandemic that are a little bit different, but in general, what we've seen are exacerbated challenges that were pre-existing challenges. So take workforce as an example. How do we strengthen our workforce? How do we grow our workforce? How do we encourage people to move to Maine? How do we improve workforce participation rates? If you look at CEDS across the state, those pieces are called out, whether the CEDS was done pre-pandemic or post-pandemic, they're called out. It's just where we are in that equation. We certainly, our workforce is a more difficult challenge for us today, maybe than it was a couple of years ago, but you could see that challenge coming, and that's work that we absolutely need to do. So the ability for state and regional economic development groups to work together, I think, is critical. CEDS are a big part of that because they give us a clear and tangible option to think about projects and clear and direct work that move us all forward. So I think this alignment between the state strategic plan, the CEDS plan, and now the implementation work in partnership is a big part of what will make these be more successful and have more tangible outcomes that the people of Maine and probably any state would be able to see more clearly. So I don't know if I need to leave time for some Q&A, but we've got maybe 5 minutes left.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks so much for those comments. And yeah, why don't we maybe transition over into conversation? If everyone can kind of turn their webcams back on. There's a few questions that came through, and I know, yeah, we've got 5 minutes and tight schedules here, so maybe I'll just kind of read through those quickly. I think there's something here maybe for everyone. But yeah, there was a question that did come through saying really excited to see the collaboration that exists in Maine. Unfortunately, we know across the country that kind of state regional partnership might not be as strong. So any kind of, what's the question asking here about kind of just where do you start, you know, if those relationships aren't there? And another question similar was if there's a new administration coming in, a new governor, you know, how do you maintain that there's that kind of continuity? Or, you know, I know it's obviously about partnerships and relationships, but some thoughts on that too, where A, the partnership might not be strong, or B, how do you maintain it with the new administration coming through? So, so for Lee and Heather, those would probably be maybe some thoughts for you.
Yeah, I'll start with the new administration. You know, one of the advantages we had is, you know, we knew Heather Johnson because she was involved with broadband and some of the other commissioners. You know, that's an advantage. But one of the transitions is, you know, the method of how people govern. And Governor Mills came in to rebuild state government. So it was kind of clear what her mission was. And public health, Department of Labor, the business, all of those components. So we knew what the agenda was. And I think that's key in any state, to know what the agenda is with the state government. And I think also in establishing the relationship with the state government, to talk about, and we've done this with Commissioner Johnson, you know, the relationship with the federal government. EDDs have relationships with EDA and other departments, but it's important for the state to be part of that process. And so we try to and give updates all the time. As a network throughout the state, we meet and talk with Heather. And if I have any news, I might send an email, or just we give updates, and our whole team works with her team. So I think that it goes beyond just the governor and the commissioner, but just go a little deeper and know who's the content knowledge program people with portfolio and work directly with them is really important. And the way the teams work, they communicate back to the commissioner, so you don't have to deal with the big shot all the time. You can do with some of the working people, and I think that's the key is communication, good information, and try to broaden it a little bit. I think I think that's the way to go.
Yeah, I agree with Lee. I mean, one of the first things we did was all try to sit around a table and figure out where were our common goals and what did we all care about and what did we want to do collectively moving forward. And I think that was I think got us off on a good foot, right? Everybody was willing to be open and honest and I think look around and say, we don't have enough resources to do the work that we need to do. None of us do individually and even collectively, right? We don't have enough resources to do what we need to do. So if we can figure out how to work together, share resources and leverage each other's resources, we're going to have a lot more success. And that, I think there was a kind of a clear shared vision for that amongst all of us. And that was a good place to start.
Yeah, and Brett, if I could give an example, during the pandemic, the state approached the EDDs to be partners with the CARES Act, providing technical assistance to nonprofits and businesses, but also then, distributing the checks. And I think that was a good partnership because we're in the communities, we know who the businesses are, but that shows a trust level, and it also got money out the door fast during a pandemic that people needed the help.
Great, absolutely, Lee. Yeah, that's actually a great kind of segue to the other question that did come through, and it does point out that there was just a recent announcement of kind of $1 million grants going out to the states from EDA through the ARPA funding, which is kind of a new kind of experience for EDA funding. And so the question, I guess, was for Dave about kind of what is EDA kind of expecting from these grants, and have you kind of in terms of those applications, what sort of things do you think some of these states will be doing? And Commissioner Johnson, if you're able to speak to perhaps how Maine is going to deploy some of those funds too. I think there's some questions there. It's kind of new exciting territory, I think, for that kind of federal state partnership.
Yeah, I think there are going to be some common elements around state level planning associated with recovery that I think is going to be, you'll be able to see across all the awards that are made. But I think there may be some individualized things that happen too around funding for recovery coordinators, things along those lines that may also be helpful to the different communities and regions. So I think there are going to be some elements that are consistent. And I do think you're going to see a lot more of this kind of collaboration that we heard from Lee and from Heather happening in other places. I think that's one of the primary things that we're looking for, is to see those kind of relationships expand. So that's first and foremost, but there is going to be some flexibility to do some other things at the state level that I think have been successful, and at least demonstrated successfully at the regional level through the districts and others.
Great, so it looks like we're coming up on the hour here. Bob, I want to give you the last word here as our friends at CREC. Kind of any final thoughts, reflections, what you heard? I know there's a lot of great intel here, I think, as we move forward with this project.
Oh, just an inspiring discussion here today. I really enjoyed hearing what's going on in Maine, Commissioner Johnson and Lee, and certainly our partners with Dave at EDA, David I, has really provided a great foundation to what we're trying to do and build that alignment as we move forward. I would say, in terms of the first question, I wanted to add one quick point to that. It's really important to institutionalize that relationship and not just rely on the personalities that may be present at the given point. Talk about getting past that current leadership and getting into some managers and staff to really institutionalize and integrate that long-term connection between the economic development districts and the states. But we're really excited. It's a long-term project, but I think we have shown some real great findings with the research, and moving forward, I think we're going to see some really great success in the near term. So thanks everybody for joining us, and Brett, thank you for organizing this wonderful webinar.
Absolutely, much appreciated. As always, a real honor to be up here on the virtual stage with all of you. And thanks to everyone who joined us. We had a really great turnout today. And just a reminder, there will be a short survey that pops up. So if you have 2 minutes to give us some feedback here and let us know what you need. As we said, we're really kind of ramping up on this project. There's a tremendous amount of opportunity and new resources out there. So we're just getting started here. So big thanks to everyone else. Hope you're all doing well. Happy Thanksgiving in advance. And again, keep an eye out. The recording will be made available tomorrow. You'll get an email. So please share that with some of your peers and colleagues as well. So with that, we'll say farewell and have a great rest of the day. Thanks again.